Cleopatra. She was on her knees in her brilliant grief, Cleopatra.
A very common question that I've been getting is, who is Cleopatra and why is she here in this Achilles Patroclus musical? That is an excellent question. You're probably thinking about the Egyptian queen, but it turns out there are actually multiple Cleopatras. It totally makes sense that you wouldn't have heard of this one because actually she was never mentioned anywhere that we know of before Homer. So it's very likely that Homer invented her. I'm going to come back to why this was important, but first of all, for context, she is mentioned in Book 9 of the Iliad in the embassy to Achilles. Phoenix, who was very much Achilles' father figure, is trying to convince him to rejoin the war, and he says, hey, I'm going to tell you this story. I'm going to tell you about this hero Meleager, who was in a very similar situation as you were.
Old Phoenix speaks of Meleager, a proud and fragile name, a hero who was racked with anger as the city was aflame.
But it turns out he also had this lover named Cleopatra, and Cleopatra is the one who ended up pushing him to fight for his people.
They begged the man to fight for them, he refused them all the same. But his lover watched their suffering, and she couldn't bear the pain. Phoenix says her name, and he looks at me, and we all know what he means by that. Her parents called her Halcyon, the girl who they named Cleopatra, Cleopatra.
The name Cleopatra, it's very much like a Dorothy and Theodore situation. It's composed of the elements kleos and pater, which is glory of the father, and if you'll notice, the name Patroclus is also composed of those same elements.
And he says her name, and it falls like sand, every letter coarse and fine. When you rearrange the syllables, the name she bears is mine, Cleopatra!
So Homer, what does this all mean? I think, first of all, the takeaway that is the most, that stands out the most to me is that I just find it really touching that Homer parallels Achilles and Patroclus with these mythic doomed lovers. And it really makes me think about how even today, and throughout history, of course, queer people would look back at Achilles and Patroclus and they would compare themselves to the two of them. And it's really, I think it says a lot about the nature of myth and how we all find our own place in this chain of story and history and memory by telling each other stories of the past and seeing ourselves in them. I think just as we look at Achilles and Patroclus and we see ourselves, they also looked back at mythic figures in their cultural history and they found comfort and they found joy and they found a little piece of the world that made sense again. And the other piece of it that's really cool for me to consider is that if this story did not appear anywhere else until Homer and Homer made it up, is Homer implying that Phoenix made it up? Is he implying that Phoenix created this myth in order to draw Patroclus into the story and in order to coax Patroclus into action? This is something that is just mind-blowing to me because this feels like such a meta-narrative moment in which Homer is inviting us to question who is telling us the stories that we are being told and what their agendas might be and what they're trying to get us to do with them, which, that's just something that I find really fascinating, especially since we are an adaptation that is being told through the voices of numerous performers of color, numerous queer performers, people who have typically been excluded from the spaces that ARISTOS lives in, from theater, from academia. And so I really appreciate that there is a piece of the Iliad that tells you that these myths, these epics that feel so sweeping, so grand, and so almost removed from us, from our time, that feel almost like they were handed down from the sky. There's a part of the Iliad that tells us that these myths weren't passed down to us from the gods. These myths are made by people. These myths aren't like stone statues in a museum. They're alive. They have blood running through them, and they are born and they're reborn. They're born when a father tells his son a bedtime story. They're reborn when the father tells the story anew. As the son grows, the story grows. And that just, it's just really touching to me. And that's one of the reasons why I really love the Cleopatra and Meleager moment, even though it just seems like a small moment compared to everything that surrounds it in the Iliad.